Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find us on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Today we're going to talk about steel types, relationships, and makers, and steak. So, let's say you're looking for a new knife. Okay, so, and you want this particular knife to be, you want it to excel at whatever it is that you want the knife to do. So if you're after a hunting knife, you want that knife to excel at, dressing out game, maybe skinning, fire building, the basic things that you use when you use a hunting knife. So you would break that down into, okay, well, what am I hunting? A guy that's hunting elk is going to want a slightly different knife than a guy that's hunting, small game or upland game birds. Okay, so your next choice is going to be in a steel type and a maker to make the knife. All right, well, now this is where folks get really kind of confused. Okay, so you get on the internet forums and you start looking at knives, and some guy says, hey, I've got this great knife and it's made out of D2 steel. It's the best steel out there, makes the absolute best knife. So you call up a maker that makes the class of knife that you're after. You're already after a small game knife, or a big game knife, whichever one. So you want to find a maker that makes that class of knife already. Preferably one that uses that class of knife so that he knows, what he likes in a knife, and hopefully it matches up to what it is that you're after. Okay, well, now you come down to your steel type, and so you ask the maker, you say, hey, I want this knife in D2, and the maker says, well, I'm sorry, but I don't make knives. I've never worked with D2. That maker works in two different other types of steels. That right there is a problem that an awful lot of makers have, or an awful lot of knife buyers have. They want that certain particular steel type. Maybe it's the newest, the latest, and the greatest steel. Maybe it's the tried and true, the one that their grandfather had, somewhere in between. That decision right there is what I want to talk about. Okay, so your steel choice is not as important as the relationship that the maker has with the steel that he's going to use for your knife. Now that comes, so we talked about steel types a little bit and relationships, whether the maker uses that steel type or not. So let's break that down and talk about stake and use that as a correlation as to how the choice of steel may not be as important of a choice as what you think it might be. Okay, so let's say you're going to have a steak dinner, right? Okay, well, one or two fellas, just, we're not even going to take restaurants out of the picture. So two guys are going to cook steaks for dinner one night. They go to the same grocery store. They get the same cut of meat. Let's say it's a T-bone. And one fella picks up one package, and another fella picks up the package right next to it. Okay? And let's say that both of those packages came out of the same animal right next to each other. So you're talking as close to the same exact cut of meat that you can get with two different fellas that are going to be cooking it. Okay? So one guy takes the steak, or they both take the steaks home. The one guy takes a steak and he puts it on the kitchen counter, lets it come up to room temperature. Personally, I like to rub mine down with a little bit of olive oil, season it with some garlic powder, black pepper, and seasoned salt. Let the steak come up to room temperature while I'm getting my grill ready. Throw on some charcoal, start it with lighter fluid. Let the lighter fluid all burn off and let the coals come up to temperature to where they're, just the perfect heat. Plus, all that lighter fluid is already burned off. Then, depending upon my mood, I'm either going to cook it low and slow, or I'm going to cook it hot and fast, either one. Get done cooking the steak, paying attention to it, turning it at just the right time, and then pulling that steak off, putting it on a plate, putting some butter on top of it. My buddy calls that anointing the steak with butter. And then covering the plate with the steak in aluminum foil, letting that steak rest for 10 minutes. And then, digging in. I cook an okay steak, So let's say the other fella, he takes that steak, takes it home, throws it in the refrigerator, leaves it sit there for, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that, or maybe throws it into the freezer. Whenever he's ready to cook it, he pulls it right out of the freezer, unwraps it, puts his, say he's using charcoal also, throws some lighter fluid on there, lights it up, and the second he's got flame, he takes that frozen steak, slaps it right on the grill, goes and watches the football game, remembers it halfway through, comes back when it's burnt on that side, flips it over, lets it cook, decides he's really hungry, takes it right off of there and, starts eating it right away. That right there describes the relationship that those two fellas had with their steaks while they were making them. The same thing happens with knife makers. And I'm not trying to pick on anybody or anything, but if you're after a certain steel type, go to the guy that uses that steel type. Okay, so if you want to use 1095, okay, well, I've made a couple thousand knives out of 1095, With 1095, I like to get my 1095 from a certain couple of suppliers. I've got two of them that I really like. I've had problems with 1095 from other sources, so I don't use them. So I get my 1095 from two different sources. When I go to work that 1095, besides cutting it out, profiling it, grinding it, doing the heat treat, when it comes to the heat treat, I set my kiln at the exact temperature that I did for the last time that I did 1095, and that from my testing is shown to be the correct temperature for heating the blade up for the quench. I set one of my timers, for the right amount of time for that blade to be in that hot kiln. And then when I go to quench that knife, I quench that knife in canola oil, but not just any canola oil that's been heated to drive the moisture off, and then quench the blade, and then so on and so forth, and then, I know what to grind the blade to based on, testing with that same steel type, with that from the same manufacturer, to get repeatable performance. Now, a friend of mine, Ed Fowler, is the same way. He works just in 52-100. If you want a knife out of 52-100, and you don't want to buy one of mine, 52-100 is also the steel that I use, Ed Fowler. Ed Fowler has worked 52-100 for a long time, knows an awful lot about that particular steel type from his suppliers, how to work it with the type of knives that he makes. That Hitachi white steel or Hitachi blue steel. My friend Murray Carter, that guy has made, I think he said, last I read in one of his books, I think he said he made like 20 or 30,000 knives out of Hitachi white steel. There's not a whole lot that you can know about Hitachi white steel that he doesn't know, because he's dedicated his entire career to one or two steels and knows an awful lot about them, knows the best place to get the steel, knows how to heat treat the steel to bring out the best qualities, knows how to grind the knife to bring out those, to be able to show those qualities, and knows how to finish the knife off. Now, if you look at that the other way, okay, so let's say you got a maker that works primarily in ATS 34, and you tell them that you want this knife, but you only want the knife in D2, and you'll pay whatever it takes, to get the knife in D2. And the guy says, well, I've never worked in D2, but I've got this guy that really wants one. So he orders up some D2 from a supplier, a quality supplier. And then he looks in his heat treating book, or he looks on the internet and tries to find out, basic heat treat information for D2. So let's say he comes up with this is kind of the standard heat treat for D2. I honestly don't know what it is. I've never heat treated D2. But let's say the kiln has got to be at, 1600 degrees Fahrenheit or so, and you need a 20-minute soak and, quench it and whatever, right? Well, what happens if his kiln is 25 degrees off from the guy that developed that heat treat? or what happens if he's using 3/16 of an inch stock instead of 3/32 of an inch stock. It takes a little bit more time for that heat to penetrate to the center of the 3/16 inch stock than it does the 3/32 inch stock, because the steel's thicker. That's the sort of thing that I'm trying to get across, as your steel type does not matter near as much as the relationship that the maker has with that particular sort of steel. If you find a maker that's dedicated to one steel type, or two or three steel types, in my case I think I order for 440C, 1095, 52-100, 5160, and soon to be Damascus made out of 1095 and 15N20. And I've made a whole bunch of knives out of those particular steels, and I don't work with ones that I've never worked with before. But if you find a maker that works with the steel type that you're after, or one that's pretty close, and he's been dedicated to that steel type and knows the ins and outs of that steel type, even if it's not the particular steel that you're after, that relationship that that guy has with that steel, that's what you're after. So if you wanted a knife in D2 and he only offers it in ATS 34, more than likely, if he has a good relationship with ATS 34, you're going to get a knife that you're going to be happy with, even though it's not in the steel that that you might have wanted to begin with. So anyway, lots of rambling. Hopefully you got something good out of it. And the steel type is not as important as the relationship that the maker has with the steel of his choosing. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.